I've always tried to be the patient one, the understanding one, the one who doesn't ask for much. But that night, at the dinner table, when my husband told me he gave my surgery fund to his mother, my world changed. It started like any other Tuesday. The smell of pot, roast, filled the dining room, heavy with rosemary and garlic. I remember staring at the steam rising off the gravy boat, trying to ignore the sharp, grinding pain radiating from my lower back down to my hip. Every time I shifted in my chair, it felt like bone rubbing against bone. But I smiled. I kept the grimace off my face because we had company. Dr. Hannah Pierce was sitting across from me. She wasn't just my doctor. She was my oldest friend. She knew exactly how much pain I was in because she was the one who had shown me the x-rays just last week. She was the one who told me I couldn't wait anymore. My husband, Barry, sat at the head of the table, happily buttering a roll. He looked relaxed. He looked like a man who didn't have a care in the world. He didn't notice that I was gripping the edge of the table just to keep my posture straight. "Pass the salt, would you, Diane?" Barry asked, not even looking up from his plate. I handed it to him. My hand was shaking a little, but he didn't see it. He never really saw it. "I had a productive day today," Barry announced, shaking the salt over his potatoes. He looked pleased with himself. "Stopped by the credit union on my way back from the golf course." I nodded, taking a small bite of carrots. I wasn't really listening. I was mentally calculating how many hours I'd need to stand on my feet at the reception desk tomorrow, and if my painkillers would last the shift. "Oh, that reminds me," Barry said, his voice casual. It was the same tone he used when he told me he'd forgotten to take out the trash. "I transferred that savings account to Mother today." I stopped chewing. The fork froze halfway to my mouth. "What?" I whispered. "The savings account," Barry repeated, taking a large bite of roast. "The one at the credit union. I moved it over to Mother's account this afternoon." The room suddenly felt very cold. The buzzing of the refrigerator seemed to get louder. "Barry," I said, my voice trembling, "that wasn't just a savings account. That was the fund. My surgery fund." He waved his hand dismissively, like he was swatting away a fly. "Oh, Diane, don't start with that. It's just money sitting there doing nothing." "Doing nothing?" I felt the blood drain from my face. I have been saving that money for 3 years. Every overtime shift at the clinic. Every weekend I worked. That is $25,000 for my spinal surgery. Barry sighed, putting his fork down with a clatter. He looked annoyed, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "Look, Mother called me this morning in tears," Barry said, looking at me with a mix of pity and frustration. "She's depressed, Diane. Winter is coming, and she feels trapped in that house. She needs a new sunroom, something bright to lift her spirits." I stared at him. I couldn't breathe. My mind was racing back to the days I stood at the reception desk for 10 hours straight, smiling through the agony, putting every single extra dollar into that account. I denied myself new clothes. I drove a car with no air conditioning for 2 summers. I did it all because I knew eventually I would be able to fix my back and walk without pain again. "You gave my medical fund for a sunroom?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "She deserves it," Barry said firmly. "She raised me. She's 80 years old, Diane. She deserves a pick-me-up. Besides, your back isn't that bad. You're just stiff. You create so much drama around a little back pain." A little back pain. The words hung in the air. I felt a tear hot and sharp prick the corner of my eye. He didn't just steal my money. He stole my relief. He stole my future. He looked at my agony and decided a glass room for his mother was more important. I looked at Barry, waiting for him to laugh, waiting for him to say it was a bad joke. But he just went back to cutting his meat, completely unbothered. He truly believed he had done a good thing. I couldn't speak. I felt small. I felt invisible. I felt like the last 40 years of marriage meant absolutely nothing. Slowly, I turned my head to look at Hannah. She wasn't eating. Her face had gone pale. She was staring at Barry with an expression I had never seen on her before, a mix of professional horror and personal rage. Then it happened. Hannah's hand opened. Her silver fork slipped from her fingers and hit the china plate with a loud, sharp clatter that echoed through the silent dining room. Barry looked up, startled. "Everything all right, Hannah?" Hannah didn't blink. She didn't look at him. She looked at me, and then she slowly pushed her chair back. The silence wasn't just quiet anymore. It was dangerous. The silence that followed the sound of Hannah's fork hitting the plate wasn't just awkward. It was heavy. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I looked at my hands, resting in my lap, twisting the napkin until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to disappear. I was used to swallowing my feelings to keep the peace, used to nodding along when Barry made decisions that hurt me. But Hannah wasn't. Hannah didn't look at me. She turned her entire body toward Barry. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't scream. She shifted into a tone I had heard her use only a few times before, usually when she was delivering bad news to a patient's family at the hospital. It was her doctor voice, calm, precise, and terrifyingly serious. "Barry," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "Do you understand why Diane needs that surgery?" Barry chewed his roast slowly, looking annoyed that his dinner was being interrupted. "She's got a bad back. Hannah, we all get aches and pains when we get older. I've got a bad knee, but you don't see me scheduling expensive operations." "It is not aches and pains," Hannah said. She leaned forward, placing her hands flat on the table. "Diane has severe spinal stenosis with nerve root compression. Do you know what that means?" Barry reached for his wine glass. "It means she needs to stretch more. Maybe do some yoga. My mother does yoga, and she's 12 years older than Diane." "It means," Hannah interrupted, her eyes locking onto his, "that the canal housing her spinal cord is narrowing so severely it is choking the nerves that control her legs. Every time she stands for a shift at work, she risks permanent nerve damage." I flinched, hearing it said out loud, at my dinner table, made it real in a way I had been trying to ignore. "You're being dramatic," Barry scoffed, taking a sip of wine. "She walks fine. She's walking right now. She is walking because she is tolerating a level of pain that would put most men in the hospital," Hannah said. "But that isn't the problem, Barry. The problem is what happens next. Without this decompression surgery, she is at high risk for cauda equina syndrome." Barry rolled his eyes. "English, Hannah. Speak English." "Paralysis," Hannah said. The word hung there. "Permanent loss of bladder and bowel control. Foot drop, meaning she won't be able to lift the front of her foot, which will lead to falls. If she falls with her spine in this condition, she likely won't get up again. We are not talking about a backache. We are talking about Diane ending up in a wheelchair for the rest of her life." I looked at Barry. I waited for the shock to hit him. I waited for him to put the wine glass down, to look at me with worry, to say, "Oh my God, I didn't know." Instead, he chuckled. He actually chuckled. "You doctors," Barry said, shaking his head with a smirk, "always the doom and gloom. You have to scare people to justify those insurance payouts, right? Diane is tough. She's a workhorse. She's not going to end up in a wheelchair because of a pinched nerve." My heart stopped. She's a workhorse. That was it. That was all I was to him. A machine that kept his house clean, his dinner cooked, and his life comfortable. And as long as the machine was still running, he didn't care if the gears were grinding themselves to dust. "I am telling you, as a medical professional," Hannah said, her voice dropping an octave, that if she does not have this surgery within the next 3 months, the damage will be irreversible. She needs that money, Barry. It is not optional. Barry slammed his wine glass down. Wine sloshed over the rim onto the white tablecloth I had starched yesterday. And I am telling you that it's my money, and I decided my mother needs it more right now. Barry snapped. My mother is 80. She doesn't have much time left to enjoy her life. Diane has plenty of time. She can save up again. What's another year or two? Another year or two. I looked down at my feet. I couldn't feel my left big toe. It had been numb for 3 weeks. I hadn't told Barry because I knew he would complain about the copay for the specialist. Hannah stood up. She didn't excuse herself. She didn't offer to help clear the table. She picked up her purse from the floor. I can't sit here and watch this, Hannah said. She looked at me, and her eyes were filled with tears. Diane, I will call you tomorrow, but I cannot break bread with a man who would gamble his wife's ability to walk against a sunroom. She walked out. The front door closed with a firm click. The silence rushed back in, but this time it was angry. I stared at the empty chair where my friend had been, my only defender. Barry let out a loud, exasperated sigh. He picked up his fork and stabbed a potato. Unbelievable, he muttered, chewing aggressively. Absolutely unbelievable. I looked at him. Barry, don't. He pointed his fork at me. Don't you start. You embarrassed me, Diane, sitting there like a mute while your friend disrespects me in my own house. Paralysis. What a load of rubbish. She just wanted to ruin dinner because she thinks she's smarter than everyone else. He didn't care about the risk. He didn't care about the pain. He cared that I had made him look bad. He cared that his dinner was cold. I'm going to watch the game, Barry said, standing up and throwing his napkin on his half-eaten plate. Clean this up, and don't invite her back until she learns some manners. He walked into the living room. A moment later, I heard the TV blare to life. The laugh track of a sitcom filled the house. I sat alone at the table, surrounded by the smell of cooling pot roast, and realized for the first time that the pain in my back wasn't nearly as bad as the sudden, crystal-clear realization that I was married to a stranger. A dangerous stranger. I didn't sleep in our bed that night. I couldn't. The thought of lying next to Barry, hearing him snore while my back throbbed and my future crumbled, made me feel physically ill. I cleaned the kitchen first, though. That's the habit of a lifetime. Even when your heart is breaking, you don't leave grease on the pans. Every time I bent down to load the dishwasher, a hot bolt of lightning shot down my left leg, a cruel reminder of exactly what Dr. Pierce had warned us about. After the last plate was dried, I took my pillow and a quilt to the guest room down the hall. I shut the door, curled up on the mattress, and finally let myself cry. I cried for the money, yes, but mostly I cried because I felt foolish. I had spent 40 years believing we were a team. Around 9:30 p.m., the house was quiet. The TV was off. I was just starting to drift into a restless, pain-filled doze when I heard it. Barry's voice. He was in the hallway, pacing back and forth. The floorboards creaked in that familiar way, but it was his tone that made my eyes snap open. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't the angry, dismissive man who had just insulted my doctor. He sounded light, happy even. Hi, Mother. Did you get the notification? I held my breath. The walls in our house are thin. Yes, the whole amount, Barry said, his voice dripping with affection. I wanted to make sure you could hire that contractor before the frost sets in. You can't be cooped up in the dark all winter. I stared at the ceiling fan in the dark. The whole amount. He was proud of it. He was bragging about giving away my ability to walk so she could have a better view of her garden. There was a pause while she spoke on the other end. Then Barry laughed, a loud, hearty chuckle that I hadn't heard directed at me in years. "Oh, stop worrying, Mom. You know how Diane is," he said. My stomach twisted into a knot. "She's just being dramatic," he continued, his voice lowering slightly as if he were sharing a secret. "She had Hannah Pierce over for dinner tonight, and you know how doctors are. They got each other worked up. Hannah was trying to scare us with big words, talking about paralysis and wheelchairs. It was ridiculous." I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from sobbing out loud. Ridiculous. My fear, my doctor's professional diagnosis, my sleepless nights in pain. To him, it was just women getting worked up. "No, I didn't tell her to call you," Barry said soothingly. "Don't you dare apologize. You deserve this, Mom. You raised 3 boys on your own after Dad died. If anyone deserves a little luxury, it's you. Diane will get over it. She always does. She always does." That sentence hit me harder than the diagnosis. It wasn't just an observation. It was a strategy. Barry knew I would get over it because I always had. When he bought the boat, instead of fixing the roof, I got over it. When we spent every Christmas at his mother's house, instead of visiting my sister, I got over it. He was banking on my silence. He was counting on me being the good wife who absorbs the blow so the boat doesn't rock. "Exactly," Barry said, laughing again. "She's just terrified of surgery. Anyway, I'm probably doing her a favor by taking the option away. Now she doesn't have to worry about going under the knife. She can just do her stretches and take some aspirin." I lay there, frozen. He wasn't just selfish. He was rewriting reality to make himself the hero. He convinced himself he was saving me from surgery by stealing the money for it. "Go ahead and sign the contract for the sunroom tomorrow," Barry said. "Get the heated floors, too. I want you comfortable. Okay. I love you too, Mom. You're the best girl I know." He hung up. I heard his heavy footsteps recede down the hall, followed by the bedroom door clicking shut. He went to sleep in our bed, untroubled, secure in the love of the only woman who apparently mattered to him. I lay in the dark guest room, staring at the shadows on the wall. The tears had stopped. A strange, cold clarity was washing over me, replacing the sadness. For decades, I thought Barry and I were partners. I thought we were building a life together, brick by brick. But listening to that phone call, I realized the truth. I wasn't his partner. I wasn't his wife. I was the staff. I was the accessory he kept around to make his life function, the workhorse he mentioned at dinner. But his emotional loyalty, his protection, and his financial support belonged to his mother. He was a 70-year-old man who was still desperate to be a good boy for Mommy, even if it meant breaking his wife's back. He thought I was just dramatic. He thought I would get over it. I shifted my leg, wincing as the nerve pain flared hot and angry behind my knee. I reached for the bottle of ibuprofen on the nightstand, dry swallowing 3 pills. Barry was right about one thing. I had always gotten over it. I had always forgiven him. But as I lay there, feeling the throb in my spine and the emptiness in my bank account, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to get over this. Not this time. He wanted to treat his mother like his wife. Fine. He wanted to treat me like an inconvenience. Fine. Tomorrow, I wasn't going to be the wife who smoothed things over. Tomorrow, I was going to the bank. And I was going to find out exactly what happens when the workhorse stops pulling the cart and starts kicking back. I woke up the next morning before the sun. Barry was still snoring, a deep, rhythmic rumble that used to comfort me, but now just sounded like the noise of a man with a clear conscience. I didn't make coffee. I didn't shower. I just pulled on a pair of slacks and my sturdy walking shoes, the ones with the extra arch support, and drove straight to the credit union. The whole drive there, I bargained with myself. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe he had moved it to a high-yield savings account for us. Maybe it was a prank. Men do stupid things sometimes. I told myself, maybe he didn't actually send all of it. But when I walked into the lobby, the air conditioning hit me like a splash of cold water. It was quiet, that hushed, sterile silence of banks that always makes you feel like you should whisper. I walked up to the counter. Sarah was working the window. She's a sweet girl, maybe 25, with bright red glasses. She knows me because I was in there every other Friday for 3 years, depositing my paycheck from the clinic. "Good morning, Mrs. Jefferson." Sarah chirped, smiling. "You're here early. Is Barry coming in too?" "No, just me today, Sarah," I said. My voice sounded thin, brittle. "I need to check the balance on the secondary savings account. The one ending in 402. Sarah typed on her keyboard, her nails clicking rapidly. "Sure thing, let me just pull that up." Her typing stopped. The silence that followed was different from the quiet of the lobby. It was the silence of a problem. I saw Sarah's smile falter. She squinted at the screen, tapped a few more keys, and then her face softened into an expression that made my stomach drop. Pity. She was looking at me with pity. "Mrs. Jefferson," she said softly, Did you authorize a transfer yesterday?" "Just tell me the balance." "Sarah." She hesitated, then printed out a small slip of paper. She slid it across the marble counter upside down, like she was handing me a bad report card. I flipped it over. Available balance, $0. I stared at the number. 0. Not $5. Not 100. 0. Under the transaction history, there was one line item dated yesterday. External transfer, Jefferson, $25,200. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. Instead, I stared at that piece of paper, and suddenly I wasn't standing in the bank anymore. I was back at the reception desk at the Fort Worth Urgent Care. The memory hit me so hard I had to grab the counter for support. I remembered the summer of 2021. The air conditioning had broken at the clinic, and it was 90 degrees in the waiting room. I was working a double shift because we were short-staffed. My back was screaming. It felt like someone had inserted a hot poker right at the base of my spine. I remembered looking at the clock on the wall, 2 p.m., and realizing I had 6 more hours to go. I remembered the way my feet swelled inside my shoes until the laces cut into my skin. I remembered going to the break room, taking 2 Tylenol, and telling myself, $200. That's $200 for the fund. That's one step closer to the surgery. Just stand up, Diane. Just go back out there. I remembered the vacations I didn't take. The winters I wore a coat with a broken zipper because a new one cost $150, and $150 was the cost of the anesthesia consult. I remembered eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch for 2 years so I could bank my entire paycheck. That money wasn't just numbers on a screen. That money was my pain. It was every hour I stood when I wanted to collapse. It was every grimace I hid from patients. It was the physical deterioration of my body, traded hour by hour, dollar by dollar, for the promise of a cure. I had sold pieces of my life to fill that account, and Barry had given it away for a sunroom. He hadn't just stolen money. He had stolen 3 years of my suffering. He took the sweat off my brow and the ache in my bones and handed it to a woman who had never worked a hard day in her life, just so she could watch the snow fall in comfort. "Mrs. Jefferson?" Sarah's voice brought me back. She was leaning forward, looking worried. "Are you okay? Do you want a glass of water?" I looked down at the receipt in my hand. My grip tightened on it, crumpling the paper into a tight, jagged ball. The sadness evaporated. The shock dissolved. What was left in its place was something hot and hard, like iron coming out of a forge. "No, Sarah," I said. My voice was different now. It was steady. It was low. "I don't need water." I looked at the transaction line again. M. Jefferson. Barry thought I was weak. He told his mother I was dramatic. He thought I was just an old woman who would complain for a few days, and then go back to making his dinner and washing his clothes, hobbling around the house while he played the hero for his mother. He forgot one thing. You don't work double shifts on a broken spine without having a backbone of steel. Can I print a copy of the full transaction history? I asked, with the timestamp. Of course, Sarah said, relieved to have a task. She printed the page. I folded it neatly and placed it in my purse next to my car keys. I walked out of the bank. The sun was fully up now, bright and blinding. My back throbbed with every step across the parking lot, the familiar sharp pinch in my hip reminding me that I was broken. But as I unlocked my car, I didn't feel broken. I felt dangerous. Barry wanted a sunroom. Fine. He wanted to prioritize assets. Fine. I started the engine. I wasn't going home to cry. I wasn't going home to beg. I was going home to negotiate. And I knew exactly which asset of Barry's I was going to leverage. He had taken my safety net. It was only fair I took his toy. I pulled into the driveway, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. And there he was, Barry. He wasn't inside worrying about me. He wasn't on the phone with the bank trying to fix his mistake. He was standing in the driveway with a bucket of soapy water and a chamois cloth lovingly wiping down Big Red. Big Red was his pride and joy, a fully restored 1969 Chevrolet C10 pickup. He had spent the last 5 years pouring money into that truck. New engine, custom leather upholstery, a paint job that cost more than my first car. He spent every Saturday morning polishing chrome instead of spending time with his grandchildren. He treated that truck better than he treated me. I turned off my car and walked up the driveway. The sun was beating down, and my hip was throbbing with that familiar, dull ache, but I didn't limp. I walked straight up to him. Barry, I said. He didn't stop wiping the fender. Hey,